I want you to close your eyes and picture a landfill. What do you see? Maybe plastic bottles, straws, takeout boxes? Did you see any clothing like t-shirts or jeans? According to the Roundup, which is a website that collects statistics, 87% of new clothing made end up in landfill. That is nearly 93 million tons each year. In a Netflix show I watched, I learned that the clothing industry has done a lot of damage to the environment, especially in the recent years. And the US has one of the highest consumption rates of clothing in the world, so we're more likely to be contributing to this problem. My objective today is to convince you to buy less clothing and choose more sustainable options. I'll talk about three main areas. The first area is water pollution. Second, wasteful production of clothes. And third, what brands are doing to improve the situation. I'll start by talking about the water pollution issue. The garment industry actually contributes a big chunk of water pollution. Megan Cerullo, a writer for the CBS News, wrote an article in April 2022 that to produce one pair of jeans, it takes 2,400 gallons of water just to do that. And according to Renee Cho in an article written for the Columbia Climate School, the dyeing process of fabrics alone accounts for about 17 to 20% of chemical pollution in the water. Pollution doesn't end at the making of the clothing. When clothing ends up in landfill, it becomes a problem with microplastics in the ocean. Microplastics are nearly impossible to collect, and it takes a long time for them to break down. According to National Geographic, in their article written in their encyclopedia, microplastics have been detected in marine organisms from plankton, whales, even commercial seafood, and even drinking water. So this is an area where if we don't take care of this issue well, this could really be affecting our health directly in a negative way. Next, we'll look at how wasteful production of clothing has increased in the last, especially 20 years. People are buying more clothes and wearing them less, which means that industry is not producing just to meet people's needs for how much clothing they need, but they're actually changing people's mindset about and turning them into a short-term mindset of buying clothes. World Bank in 2019 stated that the amount of clothes made has doubled in the last 20 years. Specifically, it went from 50 billion items of clothing a year to 100 billion items. People are buying 60% more clothing as a result of that. This is made possible only because industries are producing clothes for much cheaper nowadays. One of the biggest arguments against sustainable clothing is actually how good it has been to the economy in the recent years. Although it's been wasteful, if you look at the graph, this is according to a statistic collected by Zippa in 2023, you can see that the clothing industry has been seeing an increase in sales in the last 20 years. 2020 was an exception for COVID. But brands have been producing cheaper in order to sell more, and that's how they've been making more money. Producing cheap comes at a loss of quality and longevity of the clothing, and it also contributes to this problem of cheap labor, which is another separate issue, but it is nonetheless a big one. Instead of selling more for cheap, if companies can start selling less but higher quality, I hope this can minimize the negative effect on the economy. Finally, let's look at different ways some brands are trying to combat this issue. Different brands have sustainability programs consumers can participate in. The first example I'll give you is the Patagonia's Wornwear program. At Patagonia, they let you trade in old clothing and they will refurbish them and put them on this Wornwear website where people can buy them second-handed. And this is their way to keep clothing items in circulation longer. I've actually bought a coat from Patagonia's Wornwear, and even though it was a coat made in 2009 or somewhere around there, it was still in great shape, and I've been wearing it for the last few years. So I can tell you that this is a good example of making clothes last longer. One image people have with sustainable clothing is that they would be more expensive. However, if you think about the years and years that this clothing was able to survive, it is just a question of how intentional you are with buying your clothes and in the end, it probably won't be costing you much more. Another popular type of programs that brands run is renting clothes. One reservation people have with sustainable clothing is that they have this image of they'll be limited to only a few options if they can only buy less. But for fashion, expressing yourself and trying on different styles is a big part of the industry. So without compromising, if you rent clothes, you can try on many different things, rent short term, long term. This way, we can still help the environment, but still keep the fun of wearing different clothes. According to their website, by renting, we can use 24% less water per garment, which is a big help in trying to fix the water pollution issue that we have. So, to review the main points of my speech, first I discussed the water pollution issue in the clothing industry and how much it's contributing to it, particularly with microplastics. Then we discussed how the clothing industry has increased in the amounts of how much clothing they're making and how that's only made possible because of cheap and low quality clothing. And then finally, we visited a couple of ways that brands like Patagonia and Rent the Runway are trying to combat this issue and become more sustainable. So, from my speech today, I hope it was clear that our clothing consumption has become quite excessive in the last 20 years, and therefore we must try to buy less clothing and be more intentional about what clothing to buy. When we think about buying new clothes next time, I urge you to think about if you really need it and how long this item will actually last, and if it's made by a company that is more conscious about sustainability. Thank you for listening.